starters, really, the most important thing. I mean, all those things you can do are great, but I think the most important thing we can all do right now is building an independent movement to challenge the power structure. And it's I say independent because it can't be part of either party, because both parties are very much part of the power structure. And it has to be something that brings all the issues together, to recognize that we have a common enemy, a common political foe that's blocking progress on virtually every issue. And I work on a lot of issues, and on every issue it comes down to the same thing. Money talks, it's a money-run government, it's corporate power, the people are ignored. You know, you remember Margaret in the Caucus Aid, I was one of the Caucus Aid as well. You know, we stood up in the Finance Committee because we were not being heard. We had 20 people testifying, Chamber of Commerce, the insurance companies, the pharmaceutical companies. We looked at 20 people testifying. Their groups had, various people from their groups had given $3 million to everyone who's on the committee. And they were all being heard, and we weren't. Despite us having 2/3 support in the public, despite us having evidence-based solutions, despite us knowing that Medicare works and Veterans Administration works better than the market-based insurance system, all the foreign experience, despite all that, rather than listening to what works and what the people wanted, they listened to the money. And that is the problem with every issue. Pick the issue. It's these corrupt corporate interests that control both political parties and the system. And that's where we formed the Occupy. We realized when we started, about 5 of us came together back in April to start to talk about what can we do to get people's voices heard. And we looked at Egypt. We looked at Madison taking their capital. We looked at Spanish just getting started in 15. And we saw that when you occupy public space, you also get to occupy part of the political dialogue. People listen to you. When you're occupying public space, taking back the Commonwealth, which is a very important concept that we have to build on, Commonwealth, because that's really what a lot of the wealth in this country is based on. All of us investing in things like roads and transit and research and what we all call corporate welfare. Because people are investing in that, but the 1% getting rich. And so that's a Commonwealth that we have to take back. And that's so public space has a lot of different meanings to it. And we always saw the public space occupation as a tactic. In fact, the Spanish told us that you shouldn't do that more than 2 weeks. That after 2 weeks that tactic attracts homeless and mentally ill, emotionally disturbed, addicted, alcoholics, and you lose the images you want, you lose the message you want, and they said don't go more than 2 weeks. We didn't listen to that. I think that may have been a mistake.
What was the mistake?
It wasn't that we didn't listen, that we lost control of it. You know, by the time we got started, you know, we started in April, we went public in June. Adbusters announced Occupy Wall Street in early July. We endorsed Occupy Wall Street in mid-July. They went out on September 17th. We were there for the first day, and it became a national movement. In fact, we had organized about 35 states with local leaders to bring people to Washington, but when OWS started, a lot of them decided to stay home and start occupying their communities, which was great. So we had a national movement. But what happened then was it lost control. It was about occupying space. I think that was a mistake. Because what we realized that there's working on this for 6 months, preparing to go out. Not only to debate what we stand for, and what we stand for, by the way, is quite simple: end corporate rule, shift power to the people. That's what we stand for. We want a 99% government, not a 1% government. So, and then, you know, every issue fits under that. We can talk about any issue. You can see how well it fits. But anyways, we studied what it takes to shift power in a non-violent revolt. What does it take to shift power? And there's actually some research on this. There's a group called the Albert Einstein Institute. It's aeinstein.org. And they've been studying nonviolent movements, shifting power to the people for 40 years around the world. And you can download a bunch of books from aeinstein.org. You can download all sorts of information there. So if you want to read up on this and study, there's a lot of information out there. So, you know, I'll give you a few points, but there's a lot more than what I'm going to say tonight. What we focus on is what holds the power structure in place. And what they point to is 9 columns that hold the power structure in place: military, police, business, media, faith groups, non-government organizations, civil servants, and I missed one. But anyway,
Youth and workers.
What's that?
Youth
and workers. There was 2. Youth and workers. So those are the 9 that hold the power structure in place. And what they tell us is the goal of a nonviolent movement is to pull people from those 9 pillars to the movement. Get them to join your movement and weaken those pillars. And when you look at those pillars, even before there is any kind of effort to pull people away, you can see those pillars are kind of shaking already. Business ain't doing that well. Workers aren't doing that well. Youth aren't doing that well. Corporate media is not doing very well. You can go through that and see lots of problems. And so that makes our job a little bit easier. So we act with intention in order to pull people to our side and weaken those pillars. So, for example, with media, independent media. Build independent media. As the conglomerates come together with more media combined, there's less jobs. We're seeing around the country investigative reporters who used to do work at commercial media now doing web-based independent media. Democratize the media. Everyone in this room is a media outlet if you want to be. Your iPhone can be turned into a live stream television. Your Facebook page is a media outlet. Your email list is a media outlet. The organizations you're involved in reach lots of people. And so if we all act with intention to use our ability to speak to lots of people, everyone in this room, what is there, 40 people in this room, 35 people in this room, act with intention, we're a small newspaper. We can reach 50,000, 75,000 people through our networks if we act with intention. So learning to act with intention in a democratized media. Part of the democratized media is WikiLeaks and Bradley Manning. That's also part of democratized media. Now, with WikiLeaks, and now there are other types of, there's a local leaks as well as other types of WikiLeaks type organizations, that people can feed information. We work in a business, big business, you work in a bank, you work in the government, you can feed information and not be anonymous. And that then makes every person who wants to become an investigative reporter someone who can read documents. So we all have that democratized media. And then when the WikiLeaks and LocalLeaks publish it, we all can become columnists and write about it, analyze it, discuss it, generate ideas and organization around it. So that's one example of how you weaken the media column. With police, that's a critical column to weaken, as is military. And you want to let the police know that we know that they are not the 1%. We know that their families suffer through the same issues that we all suffer with. That I know, when I was arrested at the Baucus 8, in fact, it was, that we had one of the jailers tell us how his mother had lost her job, how she was too young for medical care, and couldn't afford to keep her insurance. What do we do? So even our jailer was with us, And I'll tell you, that happens over and over again. That's not unusual. The police in D.C. are working 4 years without a contract. Their health insurance is threatened, their pensions are threatened, their salaries are kept low. So, they are feeling it. But of course we know that they do have a job. And so it's very important when they do their job and try to enforce rules against us that we act with intention. Remember, our intention is to pull people to our side and weaken those companies. So if we act non-violently and they act violently, it causes divisions among the police. You saw it in Occupy Wall Street. When early in Wall Street, there was a moment where they had a protest, a bunch of people were arrested, they had some women behind some orange mesh fencing, and the commander, the white-collar commander, came up and pepper sprayed them. They weren't doing any violence, just pepper sprayed them. You could hear on the tape one of the blue-collar cops saying, "Wow, I can't believe you just did that." Division in the ranks. If those women had been throwing something at the cops or cursing the cops, we wouldn't have had that division. They would have instead the cops were unified and supported that commander. We wouldn't have had Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC that night, whose father was a cop, doing a great commentary on why the police were wrong and why the occupiers were right. We pulled them to our side. And we also, by the way, that example, we had there were 6 different independent cameras going, so when the cops lied and said they did something, there were 6 different versions to show, no, the women didn't do anything, this cop just went over and pepper sprayed for no reason. So I think it's very important to act with intention. And there's an interesting debate going on right now in the Occupy movement about violence versus diversity of tactics. I think it's very important that we think that through very carefully and act with intention. I think the only solution right now is a nonviolent approach. I think breaking windows doesn't do anything useful. I mean, I understand the anger, I understand where it comes from, but it's an act that does the opposite of what we want. It unifies people against us, it keeps those columns stronger, rather than weakens those columns and pulls people toward us. So, and on every one of these you can see, on business, we want to start to see creating, we call it a stop the machine, create a new world. Creating a new world is doing things like democratizing the economy, encouraging people to form worker-owned cooperatives, encourage people to form the kind of New Mexico health clinic that Margaret described. So we show people there are alternatives to this crony capitalist, corporate economy that only works for the top percent. So that's the strategy, is to get that kind of thing out. What we have to do as a constant is the basic three: educate, organize, mobilize. Educate people, we've done a great job, I think, the Occupy movement. We put on the agenda the issue of the wealth divide, really in a way that's never been done since the 1930s. And you can see polling now shifting in incredible ways since the Occupy started, compared really back to the 1930s, the last time you had majorities saying that the economy was structured to help the rich and was unfair. And it's become so obvious. The extremism of the wealth has become so blatant and so grotesque. When 400 people have the wealth of 154 million, 154 million. When the 6 Walton heirs, the Walmart heirs, have wealth equal to 30% of all the families in this country, the extremism of wealth is obscene, and the unfairness is obvious because those 400 people, 154 million people's wealth, pay 17.4% average tax, while everyone else pays 30% average tax. So it's just so blatant, and we're seeing, affecting the political debate. President Obama, who has as his advisor a Citibank chief of staff, and before that a JP Morgan chief of staff. Before that, Rahm Emanuel, who made $20 million in 2 years in the finance markets and was Wall Street's favorite congressman, and all the money went through him when he was head of the DCCC. So he's had 3 in a row of Wall Street chiefs of staff. But he made a speech saying, "Listen, we sound like an occupier." He sounded like he was all about the wealth divide. Of course, what he's proposing, is barely any tax on the wealthiest. When you think back when our economy didn't have a big wealth divide in the 50s and early 60s, the top tax rate was 91%. That was true for about 15 years. It was even 70% by the time we got to Reagan. So and now it's down to 35, and most places the capital gains is down to 15. So if he's talking to the kind of things that Obama's talking about, it's not much of a real challenge to the wealth. And especially this is true, and this is important to realize. Especially this is true when we recognize that the effort to create this oligarchy, this 1% government, was intentional, was planned, was methodical. You go back to the Powell Memo, 1971, the time when the Weather Underground was active, the Black Panthers, Civil Rights Movement, anti-war movement, banks were being bombed, Ralph Nader was young and threatening to sue everybody. I mean, it was a whole different era. And the banks were, the people in power were afraid. Lewis Powell was a tobacco lawyer in Richmond, who was a lawyer for the Richmond Chamber of Commerce. He sent a memo to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce in August 1971 where he laid out a plan for how corporations could take control. He first off described the situation that we're losing control, and then he described how we could take control. And the way you take control is you affect all the avenues of shaping policy. Think tanks, media, journals, courts, Congress, lobbyists, you take over the universities, he laid it all out. A couple months after that, there was a meeting in Washington, D.C. with 6 of the biggest corporations, ABC, CBS, General Electric, so right away, the media was in right at the beginning, and they decided how they're going to implement the Powell Memo. 2 months, by the way, after that memo was written, 3 months, in November, Powell was nominated to be on the U.S. Supreme Court, became a Supreme Court justice. It wasn't until 2 years later we found out about this memo, thanks to Jack Anderson, a muckraking columnist who published it, wrote about it. You can read the Powell Memo if you want, by the way. We republished it on our economic website. It's Our Economy. It's oureconomy.us. And just put Powell Memo, Powell into the search engine. There's a card there with the website on it. You just picked it up there, that blue card. If you want to pick it up, you can get our website there. But just put Powell Memo and you can see his plan. So this was a methodical plan. And the Chamber of Commerce doubled within a year. The number of corporate lobbyists skyrocketed in Washington, D.C. It was not a big business before 1971. It became a big business shortly after that. And they made a methodical effort to take over all the organs of power and decision-making and direction of the government. They've succeeded. So when we fight back, recognize they've been fighting us with intention for 40 years. And the reality is we're not going to solve the health care problem. We're not going to get single payer until we weaken those pillars of power. until we come together and recognize our common challenge. Our common challenge is to weaken the power structure and weaken corporate power. And I think this is an incredible time for it. There's been so much already going on beyond the political activities of people like the occupiers waking up and finally realizing they do have power if they get organized and having an impact already. We've changed debate. The Deficit Commission was on the verge of cutting Social Security, cutting Medicare. They got stopped because of our protest. They were afraid the Occupy would have exploded. This banking deal that came out, initially Obama was planning, the Justice Department was planning to agree to a blanket protection of get out of jail free card for any criminal activities, any civil lawsuits from individuals. That got taken out of the agreement. I think because of the Occupy movement's threats, we were protesting banks, we were protesting federal housing agencies. You know, they know we're there. If they do this kind of stuff now, they know there's going to be an explosion. People are angry, they see that they're angry, they see they're organized, and they see they're getting mobilized. They don't want to give us any ammunition. So we already stopped a blanket protection for the banks. We stopped cuts of Social Security and Medicare because we are active. We have power. And people are aware of that, and they're not going to go back to sleep. So we have to figure out ways to build this movement, get more people involved. So it's not just people occupying public space. It's not about occupying public space. That was a tactic like the Freedom Ride was a tactic. You know, we meant it as a tactic, a short-term first step to mobilize people and show people they have power and that they're not alone. And so we've shown that. You know, and it's a slow process sometimes. You got to remember, Rosa Parks was 1955, the Freedom Rides were 1960, 5 years later. So it doesn't all go in quick spurts like, you know, one direction. Now these days with communication and everything, it's changing. And things are on a fragile step when you look at our military is overextended, our budgets are overextended, our economy is in collapse. You know, there's so many weaknesses in our society, and there's so many changes that have been going on. We're on the verge of some of, you know, people have been calling it the Great Turning. Have you heard that term? If you haven't Googled, it's a great concept, Great Turning. A number of different people have written about it, and basically the concept is we're moving from a competitive, capitalist, dog-eat-dog economy to a cooperative economy. People on the internet are sharing information. People are doing things, you know, with someone creates Facebook in their dorm room. You know, it doesn't take big capital to make it all happen. And so things are changing in that way. It's a whole kind of new era and of a democratized economy. And we can build on that. Some people are calling it the third industrial revolution. That's Jeremy Rifkin's term. The third industrial revolution, the combination moving to a green economy and moving to an information technology economy, the internet, making things very different, more horizontal. So we're at a great moment. And if we recognize the power we've seen with the Occupy movement so far, if we act with intention, I really think we're going to see a change much quicker than we expect. You know, Chris Hedges always tells a story. I mean, the last thing I'll make, and we can take your questions. Chris Hedges always tells a story that he was with the East Germans, and before the wall came down, and this is the East German revolutionaries, people who were like, you know, occupiers, you know, the people who are really trying to make things change there. And they were saying, well, maybe in a year we can have people going across the border, you know, without being harassed, and open border for at least visiting family and stuff. Within 3 hours, it was happening. Mm-hmm. So you can't tell how quick this thing happens. Throughout history, this has been true. You know, it's like we've all been knocking on the wall, trying to break it down and break it down. You had that initiative so long ago, and you know, we had legislation passed in the legislature in Sacramento with the Republican governor. We're pushing and pushing on issue after issue. This is true. And it's like hitting a wall. You can't tell how close you are. But then you hit, and the light comes through, and the tipping point is there. And we don't know how close we are to that. This might be a much more hollowed out, corrupt economy and corrupt government than we even realize. And the people inside it know it more than we do. And that's why we're scared. And that's why we're going to, in the end, succeed if we do it with intention. Thank you.